Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. I'm Hondo Carpenter, editor and publisher of Raiders Today, as well as your host, joined by my good buddy, my friend, and my colleague from thespun.com, the great Matt Hladek. Matt, how are you, bud?
Doing great, Hondo, and we are 1 week, one step closer to the regular season.
I can't believe it. I think it was yesterday was 3 weeks until the first game. Can,
Yeah, first full Sunday. Yep.
yeah, Raiders game on the 10th. I'm like, unbelievable. Are you kidding me? Time is flying. All right, we got a lot to discuss, Matt, because there just is. We're going to talk about overreactions, underreactions, and all of that today. Aidan O'Connell goes out first two games. I mean, he looks tremendous. Now, I want to talk to you about this a little bit because as you know, reported when they drafted him. This is a guy that coming out of school as a junior, a lot of people thought would have been a first rounder. He chose to go back to Purdue. All of the ancillary things that went along with that, all the issues that went along with it, still got Purdue, which is a major story, to a Big Ten championship game. He has had a tremendous QB rating. He has looked good. There is nothing Aidan O'Connell has done negative. Okay. Now, I when he was brought in here, Brian Hoyer was brought in to back up Jimmy, but to be a tutor like he was to Mac Jones for Aidan O'Connell. Brian's done a really good job. We're going to give him all the credit in the world for what he's done to help Aidan. But at the same time, Aidan's taken the coaching and has come along exponentially. And so I'm hearing a lot of people, we need to just go ahead and start Aidan O'Connell. No, you don't pay Jimmy the kind of money you paid him. I can tell you right now, Aidan does not have this offense mastered. He's a rookie. It's very difficult to do. He is farther along than anybody thought he would be. So he deserves all the credit in the world for that. But I think you ride the horse of Jimmy, continue to let Aidan win it, but you've got to tap the brakes a little bit because you've got a very efficient and a very qualified QB1. I think you got to have Aidan have some time here. We wrote a story about comparing his first, start and playing to Kenny Stabler. We weren't saying he was Kenny Stabler, but the point is he played so well. We wanted to put it in perspective. Got to go back and find a Raiders quarterback in the first performance who performed that way. But I just think there needs to be let the kid develop a little bit. Your thoughts on the whole situation? No one's taken anything away from him. He's looked phenomenal. Your thoughts?
Sure, you never want to heap sort of unrealistic expectations and burdens on a rookie quarterback early on. I think that it's tough enough to do for guys that are taken with the first or second pick in the draft who are expected to be these franchise saving or franchise altering QBs. It's hard enough on them. And then you look at a kid like Aidan O'Connell, who has a lot of talent, a lot of things that you look for in a quarterback, but was drafted in the middle rounds and was not taken to be a guy counted on from day one. The Raiders, like you said, they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo for a reason. It doesn't make any sense to me for them to just shun Jimmy Garoppolo now. You don't do that. You roll with him to start the year. Listen, if Jimmy Garoppolo plays well and your performance in the preseason carries over to the regular season, and you're looking like you're hanging around the UFC playoff race and you're having a solid year, you roll with it. If you get to end of November and you're 5-7 or something like that, and you have 5 games left, and you really are at a point where you're looking like the playoffs aren't in the cards, then I think it's safe to say you turn to an Aidan O'Connell for the last month or so of the season to see what he has, to see if you think he can be the next guy for you when you move on from Garoppolo eventually. But for now, you have to bring him along slowly. You have to kind of take everything he's done in perspective. You bottle it, you put it in your back pocket, you enjoy it as a Raider fan, and you're allowed to get excited. No one's saying you shouldn't. but you don't want to heap too much on his plate right away.
Yeah, I think the Raider Nation should be excited. I think they are excited. I mean, you got a really quality young quarterback that's showing a lot of flashes. You've got a very good starting quarterback. Listen, nobody is saying that Jimmy Garoppolo is anything. The Raiders fans, and I'm not telling them what to think. I'm just giving my perspective. Is that I think there shouldn't be any angst. All right, dump Jimmy, go with this. No. I think there should be total excitement. Look at what we got. We got a great guy in Brian Hoyer to tutel, to offer tutelage, but also knows the system backwards and forwards. We've got Jimmy, who's a proven winner when healthy. And man, we've got this young kid that shows the it. I think there's a lot of reasons to be happy. I don't think there's any to be unhappy with. Agree?
I would agree with that. You're definitely feeling better about your quarterback situation than you might have even thought you'd be at this point of the preseason. Well, less than 3 weeks till the opening game.
I agree. All right. Want to get to a couple things with you real quick. As you know, I predicted the Raiders, if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, to win 9 games, to go 9-8. And you may remember I predicted them to start the season at 0-2. I predicted a loss at Denver and a loss at Buffalo. And my question for you, Matt, that I want to get to is, 9 wins to me is just the ceiling. There are still some defensive questions, not that they didn't address those issues, but there still are some defensive questions to me because you got young guys who have to learn. And so to me, you always have to budget in the learning curve. Now, if they come along quicker, more can happen. But my job is when I give a prediction, is what's my analysis of what I expect to happen. My first 2 years, I nailed it. Last year, I was terrible, worst in the world. But I own it. It's interesting to me, though, this Raider team, if they played the Broncos 10 times in Denver right now, now obviously it may look different when I see the Broncos. I think the Broncos win 6, the Raiders win 4. But I've been watching these Broncos and their ones. I've not been impressed. How big of a deal would it be for the Raiders if they could go up to Denver? And in my opinion, it would be stealing, and go up and steal a game to start that season. I'm telling you, Matt, there's going to be some adjustments to the Sean Payton system, but I'm looking ahead a little bit. Help me here.
Well, I think that, that's obviously would be a division win in a tough division, a win over a rival. I think going into that game, listen, excuse me, fans tend to, and I'm including myself in them as a fan, we may overreact to 1 week, a win or a loss. But I do think that the Broncos have a lot more pressure on them going into the season, of course, but even just going into week 1, because they were really bad last year. And Russell Wilson was really bad last year. Now, Sean Payton is a clear upgrade over Daniel Hackett. I don't think anyone's going to argue against that. But Russell Wilson, so far in the preseason, hasn't looked that great. And maybe he adjusts some more when the lights come on in September. He's better. He's more capable in the system, more comfortable, and he starts to look like the Russell Wilson of old. But if he's just old Russell Wilson and he's kind of trending more on the downside of his career, the Broncos could be in some trouble again this year. And that's a game if the Raiders steal. Well, now you give yourself some confidence. Now, even with a win there, I don't think they go to Buffalo and win in week 2, but
I don't either.
You feel pretty good coming back home, even at 1-1 for a game that's winnable against the Steelers before you go on the road again and play the Chargers in another division game. There are some games early in the season against teams that I think could be good and could be factors in the playoff race. Pittsburgh, and these are teams that missed the playoffs last year. Pittsburgh, Green Bay. I'm looking at the schedule right now. New England at home. The Green Bay game's also at home. Raiders got to go to the Bears. those are 4 games right there against teams that are kind of on the playoff cusp, whether in the AFC or NFC, where if the Raiders can beat them or at least get a couple of wins against them, you're feeling pretty good, I think, heading to the back half of your schedule that you're going to be a factor in the postseason race in the AFC. Maybe not make it, but you're not, it's the 3 and 4 win predictions that I've seen elsewhere. The more dire scenarios aren't going to come to fruition.
I'm going to say this to you, Matt, because if they get to 10 wins, now I still think it's going to be 9, but they get to 10 now, they're going to be in the playoffs. I believe a 10-win Raider team makes the playoffs to me. And there are some games that they can steal. Now, to get to 9 games, to get to 9 wins, I'm already planning on them stealing something. Now, you touched on something, and we did not discuss what we were going to talk about that I wanted to address with you that I thought was brutally important. And that is pressure. I think this Raider team is in a place that the national pundits are not discussing. There's no pressure outside of the building on them. Now, fans, but I'm not talking about that. The expectation, even among a lot of the fans, oh, this sucks. Let's just let them lose so we can burn it down and get rid of Josh McDaniels. And that's not all. I'm not implying it's all, but there is a very vocal number who feel that way. I think that puts the Raiders in a really good spot because here's my point. I think there's a ton of pressure in Denver. New owners, you just paid Sean Payton all that money. Sean Payton's run his mouth a lot. You got Russell Wilson. I think all of the pressure week 1 is on Denver. I don't think there's any pressure on the Raiders. Again, outside, there's a ton of pressure on the inside. We're going to address that next. But I think that puts the Raiders in a spot where there's a term here in Vegas. We're playing with house money.
House money.
Yep. They're playing with house money right now, Matt. And for those of you at home that don't know what it means, let's say you go to a blackjack table with $100 and you win 200 on the first hand. So now you have your $100 originally, but you have $200 worth of house money. So maybe you gamble a little bit looser. I think this Raider team goes up to Denver, and I did not feel this when I made my predictions when the schedule came out. I think they're playing with a lot of house money, and I think all the pressure's on Denver. What do you think of that?
I would agree. I think the pressure is definitely on Denver. I think even when you look beyond week 1, you look around the division. I don't think there's pressure on Kansas City. There's expectations. Obviously, they have the best quarterback in the league. One of the all-time great coach in Andy Reid. They just won a Super Bowl, second in the last few years. So there's expectations there, but they should be very good again. But I think there's pressure on Denver, and I think there's pressure on LA too, because the Chargers have had a playoff near miss 2 years ago, late in the season, against the Raiders. They end up missing the playoffs. And last year they get in and they blow a 27-0 lead to the Jaguars. And they have a really good young quarterback, Justin Herbert, but they have a head coach who's a bit on the hot seat. And I think if Brandon Staley doesn't show something this year, he might be on his way out. They did bring in Kellen Moore, who I think should help there as the offensive coordinator, but there's pressure on them too. In the division, the Raiders have, I think, the least amount of pressure by far on them, at least externally, like you said. And then when you look, again, some of those toss-up games that I mentioned early in the season, and again, we don't know how the season's going to play out once it gets going. We don't know what injuries are going to happen. We don't know what teams are going to look like. But just looking ahead on paper at the schedule going into the year, there's a lot more pressure, I think, externally on the Steelers than on the Raiders because they got to see if Kenny Pickett takes the next step up and becomes the franchise quarterback they think he can be. And they've also had a little bit of a playoff drought there, which is uncharacteristic for their franchise. There's more pressure on the Patriots because they've had a couple of losing seasons, even though they were in the playoffs 2 years ago, and they got to see if Mac Jones is going to be the guy. There's more pressure on the Bears coming into the season because, again, there's expectations on Justin Fields taking a big leap, and if he doesn't, then it's a problem. And I think the Packers are playing with a little bit of house money this year coming into the year because nobody's really expecting that much of them without Aaron Rodgers. Although,
I think
they
they're
have
going to win the AFC Norris.
there is some
Hey,
pressure on
hey.
them.
Let me just say something. A lot of the kids watching right now are going to have no idea
Oh no, the
what
black
I
and
just.
blue division. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
but
not
you're
going to
going to
know.
know what you know what I mean when I
Mhm.
say the NFC Norris division.
Yes, exactly. And still remember all the old highlights in the '90s with Chris Berman's calling it that. That's
NFC
back when
Norris.
the Buccaneers were in that division, which tells you
Yeah.
that's something kids aren't going to understand. But there is some pressure on Jordan Love, not to be Aaron Rodgers, but to show that this is a guy that they can trust as their next franchise quarterback. So
Yep.
there isn't that pressure on the Raiders. There's This could be a possibility for them to maybe play a little loose early in the season, first 7 or 8 weeks, and win a couple more games that people may not expect.
Yep. I'm telling you, and this gets us to the third point I want to discuss today. Out externally, even from their fans, there isn't a ton of pressure on the Raiders. But the pressure they are feeling is on the inside. Now, I want to um, be careful how I word this. I'm not going to tell you what he said, but I will tell you what I said. Josh McDaniels and I in the locker room had a conversation. It was off the record. I'm just going to tell you what I said. I would never, ever betray anybody, Josh or anybody. But I said to him, it is impressive to me how this team is holding themselves to a standard. Um, the first day in LA, Matt, I mean, Max, the guys, they were all mad. And they won that practice. They didn't dominate, but they won it. And they were mad. Hey, this isn't how we play. I'm not tolerating this. I want this. I want this. And Josh, to his credit, and this is, there are a lot of things now where he's different than Denver. A lot. This is one of them. He isn't trying to be Bill Belichick. He learned in his failure. And we all have been in our lives humiliated or embarrassed or torn down and taken down a few steps. I certainly have. And you learn from that if you're smart. And he has. And he has just backed away and let the team take ownership of the team. They believe in him, they trust him, and they're setting that standard now. Hey, because the Raiders of old you'd see them go to Denver, I mean, KC, and almost upset the Chiefs. And then the next week they're playing a nobody who sucks and they lose or barely have any success. And you can't be a championship team playing up or down to the level of your competition. It's just got to each week you're playing yourself. And they're doing that. And Matt, I'm telling you, the pressure they're feeling, and I think this is the good pressure, is from themselves. Hey, we know we're better. Hey, we know we can do better than this. Hey, we got to play up. And to Josh's credit, it isn't manufactured by the coach. And I'm in that locker room. I laugh at people. You're just being a voice of the. No, I'm telling you what I'm seeing, what the players are telling me off the record, more so than on. And I just think that's the pressure you want a team to have. I was not expecting it, to be honest with you, Matt. I thought it would be there, but not like it is now. Um, Kind of like Aidan O'Connell. I said I thought he was going to be a great quarterback. I thought he had a chance of being a franchise quarterback at one day in his career. I did not think he would be competing with Brian Hoyer. Sorry, I was thinking about Brian's little brother. I didn't think he would be competing with Brian right now. He's farther along. I think the Raider culture is farther along than I thought. And to me, our second question was the pressure is not there from the outside, but our third one is it is from the inside, and that's good pressure.
I would agree. I think anytime you have internal mechanisms in place, that's where players are holding themselves accountable, coaches are holding themselves accountable, and the players accountable. That's great. I think any type of self-policing that goes on in the locker room like that, and kind of, where there's clear leadership and there's clear focus and consistency. That's a word that we talked about a lot last week. And I saw Josh McDaniels mention in some of his post-game comments talking about why he chose to play a bunch of the starters against the Rams over the weekend. You're searching for that kind of consistency, that consistent effort. Listen, upsets happen in the NFL any given Sunday. You're going to have some letdowns. You're going to have some weeks where you play up and beat a team that is better than you. But I think that last year, the game to me that signified how much as an outsider how much of a mess last season was and disappointment was the loss to the Colts. A team
Mhm.
at home, you're playing them at home. The Raiders at that point were still kind of hanging around the playoff picture, and the Colts had given up. They hired Matt Saturday off his couch. Jeff Saturday, excuse me. We're all saying the wrong name. They hired Jeff Saturday off his couch, and they looked horrendous the entire time he was there, except for that game that they won. And now you're looking at that can't happen. If we go to Arrowhead and we lose to Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs, okay. If we go to Buffalo and we lose to Josh Allen and the Bills, they're
No
very
problem.
good. That happens. But you can't have a game where you have a flat effort or you're playing a team that is beatable or is struggling and you give them life like that. That's the sign of when you eliminate that, that's the sign of a team that's trying to or about to make progress to the next step. And I think that that's really crucial over the first half of the season for the Raiders because the last 8 or 9 games, with the exception of probably the Colts again on paper, even though that game's on the road, the last 8 or 9 games are really tough for the Raiders.
Mhm. Yep, I agree, Matt. I'm telling you, I'm very impressed. As listen, this team has weaknesses on the field. We're not pretending that they don't. Got a lot of young players. They're going to make young player mistakes. But I am very impressed culture wise. This is not even the same team from last year. It's just so different. It's almost mind boggling if I can be so blunt. It is fascinating for me to see. Okay, last thing I want to talk about because you touched it, and this was our fourth point. I'm going to actually talk to Josh McDaniels about it this week. Um, is that good teams take care of beating the teams they should beat, and then somehow find a way to maybe sneak one. I always say this. I remember I believe it was Nick Saban. I'm almost certain it was Nick. It could have been Bobby Bowden, could have been George Perlis, but it was one of those guys. But I think it was Nick told me once. Um, Good teams find a way to win when they're not playing good,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that was that they just somehow instinctively inside of them. I remember last year. I think the Raiders were up 17-0 or something like that against Kansas City. They were up. It was several times last year they had big leads, but I specifically remember the Kansas City game, and I remember thinking to myself, Kansas City is going to find a way to come back and win this, and they did, because good teams find a way when they're not playing good to just make a play. To me, the culture step, which is holding yourself to a standard, is the first step on getting to a championship level. The next step now is winning games when you're not playing good. And to me, there are 4 or 5 steps. I'm going to actually talk about those and write about those before the season. But I think the first step is setting a standard where the players set it, where we're not playing other teams or playing ourselves. The second standard is even when I'm not playing good, I find a way to win. That's the next step for the Raiders now that they're showing that first. Do you agree or disagree?
I would agree. And I think the analogy that I'm going to make here is one I've heard uh, on television a bunch of times from guys who are starting pitchers in the major leagues. And if you're an ace, a top line, front line starter, they say, if you make 30 starts in a season, there's going to be at least, 5 of them where you don't have it. No matter how good of a pitcher you are, you're just bad. It's a day where they're hitting you or something's not working and you're going to get, you're going to get shelled a little bit. And then there's probably, you know, 12 to 15 days where you're lights out and you feel like nobody can hit you. And there's a reason why you're one of the best at what you do. And then after that, those other, 9 to 12 starts where you're kind of in the middle, where something it feels okay, but you just don't feel as sharp as you normally do. You don't feel like an ace. You don't feel like the best you can be. The the good teams, the good pitchers, the great teams, great pitchers, they grind those out and they find enough wins or good
Mhm.
performances out of those games in the middle. And that's what you're looking at, I think, when you're a team, you're a great NFL team or a really good NFL team, there's going to be some weeks where you dominate the other team. Things are clicking on all cylinders. Maybe you're playing a team that's really bad. You're blowing them out. There's going to be a couple of weeks a year where you have a letdown, or
Mhm.
maybe you play against a team that also is really good and they get the better of you that week. But there's going to be weeks where 2 or 3 plays make a difference, or maybe even if you're the better team on paper, you don't have your A game that day. You have a C plus or a B game, and the other team's playing its A game, the best that they can play. How do you kind of find yourself within that game, within the context of the game, say, what do we need to do to secure a win here? I think that's the key to a
Mhm.
development for any franchise in the NFL.
Yeah, I remember I covered Justin Verlander for
Yeah.
the Tigers, and I remember um, one game where I think he threw maybe 6 innings, 7 innings, but or maybe six and a third, and he was okay, and maybe losing 3-2, could have been 2-1, 4-2, I don't know, but he was losing, and he walks off the mound and gets up on the, you could tell there was something going on, gets up on the mound, and he ends up pitching long enough. His team gets the lead, he gets the win. And I'm talking to him in the locker in the clubhouse afterwards. And at that time, I just always called him Rocket. I know that there's Roger Clemens, but he was a young kid, and he's such a great guy. I really like him. And I'm just kind of talking about what happened when you went off that mound. And he laughed. He goes, "You saw that, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I just reminded myself everything isn't working for me. So just throw strikes and trust my teammates. Just throw strikes that probably aren't going to get jacked out of the house. Trust my teammates to play good defense and get back in." Well, it was just a short time later he threw a no hitter, and I'm there at his locker in the clubhouse, and joking with him and laughing with him. And the next day or a couple days later, I don't remember, but I'm back in the locker room. It's a day he's not pitching, and I walk over and I go, "Hey, Rocket, it was a different day than the day you had to remind yourself." He says, "Oh man, it sure was." And my point is going along exactly with you. It's when the days you don't have it, okay, I'm going to trust my defense today. I'm going to trust my special teams to make a play. And then the days you do have it, oh, watch out. Here come Jimmy and Devontae. That's the next step for a good team, isn't it?
Without a doubt. And I think that that's something you're hoping to see from the Raiders throughout this season. I think that this year, I know this, coming off of playoffs 2 years ago and then going back to 6 wins last year was a huge disappointment. But I don't think this year has to be a playoffs or bust season for the Raiders. If
That's
the
why I said
Raiders,
9 wins.
right, that may get them in, it might not. Or even if they win, 8 games or 8-9, yes, it's a losing season, but you're in the middle, you're in the middle class, so to speak, in the NFL, and you're taking steps to get to the next level. They need to build that culture, to build that up, and to feel like you know this. The Raiders aren't just because we're the Raiders, we're not going to screw this up. Oh no, here comes same old Raiders. They need to get beyond that, and I think that's a huge point for them this year to try to make to their fan base and make to among themselves.
I'm not making any excuses. Here's the deal. If Jimmy stays healthy and they get to 9 wins, I don't think they go to the playoffs. But and if they get to the playoffs, I don't think they're a Super Bowl team. So, I mean, if you're not going to be the one hoisting the Lombardi, then what's a success? I think when this season is over, Raider Nation and internally the Raiders uh, um, building has to be able to look back at the steps of success, culture, winning games when you're not playing good, and other things, discipline. And they have to be able to say, okay, we took 3 or 4 steps up today. We're headed toward. To me, the playoffs are. or bust for a good season is next year. I
Right.
don't
I would
think
agree with
that's
that.
the I don't think
I
it's
would agree with
this
that.
year. I think this year is showing steps, showing progress, and moving along. To me, that I think that's a big one. Agreed?
100%. I think this is building the culture, building that foundation, setting you up for 2024 as a year where you want to be in the playoffs and making some noise in the division where you want to feel like you are at least
Mhm.
in the running with the Chiefs for the division title.
Yep, I agree. And you know what? If this team gets to 9 wins or somehow steals one and gets to 10, they're going to be in the running this year. Don't think they're going to get it, but they're going to be in the running. It's going to be an exciting season. All right, now listen. Next week, Matt and I are going to come back with the episode everybody loves. We're going to give our predictions. And we've already given our Raider predictions. We're going to look ahead to each division, each conference. We're going to talk Super Bowls. We're going to talk it all. That's next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. Matt, I appreciate you and your friendship, my friend.
Anytime, man. Always a pleasure.
All right, now talk to you soon. Bye,
All
everybody.
right. Have a
This
good
is
one.
Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network, and that's the one and only the legend, the great Matt Halatic.